The morning sun shimmered across the calm waters of Willow Lake, its gentle waves lapping at the shoreline that had belonged to my family for generations. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the earthy aroma of damp soil. I stood on the wide porch of my cabin, sipping coffee and listening to the distant calls of loons echoing across the water. The tranquility of the moment was as perfect as one could hope for. A fragile peace I had fought long and hard to preserve. But that peace was about to be shattered. The low rumble of heavy engines interrupted the serene morning. I squinted down the gravel road leading to my property and saw a convoy of vehicles approaching. At the head of the column was a bright yellow bulldozer, followed by a string of HOA trucks and utility vans. Bright orange construction signs lined the road, announcing, "Pathway Expansion, HOA Property." My stomach tightened. I had heard whispers in recent HOA meetings that they were planning major development projects around the lake, but I hadn't been officially notified of anything concerning my land. And now, it seemed, they were moving forward without so much as a conversation. As the lead truck came to a halt, the door swung open and out stepped Margaret Simmons, the president of the Lakeside Homeowners Association. Dressed in her trademark red blazer and matching high heels entirely unsuited for the rough terrain, Margaret exuded an air of arrogance that had become her signature. Her clipboard was clutched tightly under her arm as she marched purposefully towards me. "Mr. Collins," she called out, her tone sharp and clipped, "you've ignored our certified letters and public notices. As of this morning, we are proceeding with the authorized demolition of these unauthorized structures." I set my coffee mug on the porch railing and met her halfway down the path, my boots crunching against the gravel. "Unauthorized structures? Margaret, this cabin has stood here for nearly 60 years. My grandfather built it with his own hands. And you're telling me it's suddenly unauthorized?" She flipped through her clipboard, though the motion was purely for show. "According to the updated HOA boundary adjustments ratified in last quarter's board meeting, this portion of land is now under HOA jurisdiction. The new pathway will serve the community by providing expanded lake access and recreational opportunities. As such, your cabin obstructs our approved development." I chuckled quietly, shaking my head. "Approved by who? The board you control? You might want to double-check your authority, Margaret. Because according to the county land office and these original deeds," I pulled a folded document from my back pocket, "this land, along with 200 feet of shoreline, has belonged to my family since 1957. Margaret's face flushed briefly, before she regained her composure. "That deed is outdated. Our legal counsel has reviewed the plat maps and determined that the shoreline boundaries were redrawn during the 2004 zoning adjustments." "You mean the adjustments you tried to sneak through without county approval?" "I've been in contact with the county registrar, Margaret. The zoning adjustments were never filed properly, and your so-called maps were never validated. The official record still lists this property, including your precious shoreline, as legally belonging to me." The workers behind her had started unloading equipment, oblivious to the tense standoff unfolding. The bulldozer driver revved his engine, eager to begin tearing down what had stood for decades. "Whether you recognize the new boundaries or not," Margaret said through gritted teeth, "we are moving forward with the project today. If you interfere, Mr. Collins, you'll be in violation of HOA ordinances and subject to legal action." At that very moment, the faint wail of approaching sirens cut through the air. 2 sheriff's cruisers appeared at the far end of the drive, blue lights flashing as they pulled up alongside the HOA trucks. Sheriff Daniels, an old friend of my father's, stepped out and adjusted his wide-brimmed hat as he approached. "Morning, folks," Daniels greeted, though his tone was noticeably serious. "I believe we have a bit of a dispute here." "Sheriff, this man is obstructing an authorized HOA development project," Margaret snapped. "I've seen the paperwork, Margaret," Daniels interrupted, holding up a thick folder. "And the court has issued an emergency injunction this morning based on county records. Until this matter is fully adjudicated, no work is to proceed on Mr. Collins' property. Margaret's jaw clenched as the weight of the situation fully dawned on her. She waved frantically to her workers, ordering them to stop. The sheriff turned toward me. "Mr. Collins, you're within your rights. The HOA has no legal authority here." Margaret sputtered in frustration. "This is far from over. The HOA will not tolerate this obstruction." I folded my arms calmly. "You're welcome to take it up with the courts, Margaret, but for now, my cabin stays." The workers, clearly nervous, began packing up their equipment, while HOA board members whispered amongst themselves. The heavy machinery retreated slowly, leaving the dirt path empty once more. Margaret stood there for a few more seconds, visibly seething, before storming back to her SUV and slamming the door. As the convoy rolled away, the tension in my shoulders finally eased. But I knew this was only the beginning. Margaret had staked her reputation on this development project. She wouldn't back down easily, and I was prepared for the fight. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the treetops and cast golden reflections across Willow Lake, I sat on the porch with Grandpa's old journal in my lap. His handwritten notes detailed every transaction, every boundary marker, every deal made when he purchased the land decades ago. My family's legacy was embedded in these pages. The next few days brought a flurry of activity. Legal paperwork, emergency hearings, and escalating tensions swept through the Lakeside HOA community. Margaret's board members were divided, some loyal to her reign of power, others nervous about the growing controversy. The media caught wind of the battle. Local news stations arrived with cameras, interviewing residents who shared their own stories of HOA overreach under Margaret's leadership. The HOA's corruption was now in the public eye, but Margaret wasn't finished yet. One morning, as I reviewed legal documents with my attorney Sarah Prescott at my kitchen table, a certified letter arrived. Sarah opened it and scanned the contents, her brow furrowing. "They're filing for an emergency motion to invalidate your deed based on an obscure zoning loophole," she said. "They're claiming clerical errors in the original survey documents." I set my coffee cup down. "And does it hold water?" Sarah shook her head. "Not likely. But it's enough to drag this into a longer court battle, which is exactly what Margaret wants. She's betting you'll either cave or run out of money fighting her." "She underestimates how stubborn my family can be," I replied with a determined smile. Over the following weeks, we gathered evidence, testimonies from retired county officials, archived survey maps, tax records, and land deeds that painted a crystal-clear picture of ownership. Our legal team meticulously built the case, anticipating every argument Margaret might throw our way. The day of the first major court hearing arrived. The courthouse was packed. Local reporters, HOA members, and curious residents filled the pews. Margaret sat confidently at the defense table, flanked by her high-priced attorneys. The proceedings began with Margaret's counsel arguing procedural errors in the original deed. But our team responded with irrefutable evidence. Notarized documents signed by county commissioners from 60 years ago, county tax assessments issued solely in my family's name, and most importantly, a chain of uninterrupted ownership that no amount of creative legal maneuvering could dispute. At one point, my attorney introduced the retired county surveyor as a surprise witness. The elderly gentleman took the stand, his voice clear and firm despite his age. "I was the one who oversaw the survey and recording of Mr. Collins's property," he testified. "There were no errors. The records Margaret Simmons submitted have been tampered with. They do not match the county archives." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Margaret's attorneys scrambled. Their entire case was collapsing in real time. The judge, visibly annoyed with Margaret's tactics, issued a stern warning. "Ms. Simmons, this court will not tolerate the submission of falsified or altered documents. Any further attempts to mislead this court will result in sanctions." As the hearing adjourned, Margaret's once unshakable confidence was gone. The media outside the courthouse captured her hasty retreat as reporters bombarded her with questions about the forged documents. In the days that followed, more cracks appeared in the HOA's foundation. Board members resigned one by one, unwilling to be associated with the unfolding scandal. Homeowners who had lived under Margaret's authoritarian rule found their voices, demanding her resignation. But Margaret, ever defiant, refused to step down. She clung to the shrinking authority she had left, threatening countersuits and sanctions against anyone who opposed her. Yet with each passing day, her power eroded, and I knew it was only a matter of time before this battle reached its final act. As I stood on the shoreline one quiet evening, watching the moonlight dance on the surface of Willow Lake, I could feel the weight of my family's history in every ripple of the water. This land wasn't just dirt and trees. It was legacy, freedom, and the promise that no bully, no matter how powerful, could strip us of what was rightfully ours. The showdown with Margaret was far from over, but with every lie exposed, every false claim defeated, we were closing in on the end game. The storm clouds gathered over Willow Lake not just in the sky, but in the hearts of everyone involved. The legal battles had pushed both sides to the brink, and now the HOA's reign of intimidation, manipulation, and fabricated claims was finally cracking apart. Margaret Simmons, once untouchable in her red blazers and condescending smiles, found herself cornered by a mountain of evidence she couldn't dispute. But like a wild animal sensing its imminent defeat, she prepared for one final, desperate strike. The morning of the final hearing arrived crisp and cold, the autumn air thick with tension. My attorney, Sarah Prescott, met me outside the courthouse. She carried a leather briefcase stuffed with documents, affidavits, and the mountain of evidence we had collected over months of painstaking work. Sarah glanced at me with a confident nod. "Today's the day," she said. "Margaret's running out of places to hide." As we entered the courthouse, we were greeted by dozens of reporters and camera crews, their microphones outstretched, their questions flying like arrows. The media frenzy had exploded after the revelation that Margaret's legal team had submitted falsified documents to the court. Now, the entire town, and much of the state, was watching. What had begun as a dispute over a simple pathway expansion had become a high-profile scandal about corruption, abuse of power, and one man's battle to protect his family's legacy. Inside, the courtroom was filled with HOA members, town residents, legal experts, and curious onlookers. The tension was palpable. Margaret sat at the defendant's table, her expression a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. Her once carefully controlled facade was cracking, and even her own attorneys seemed more interested in protecting their careers than defending her. Gone was the entourage of HOA board members who once blindly followed her. Most had resigned or distanced themselves from the scandal. The judge entered, his face stern and weary from months of proceedings. He adjusted his glasses and called the court to order. Sarah opened with a commanding argument, laying out the timeline of events. She spoke of forged documents, illegal land grabs, false zoning claims, and an orchestrated campaign of harassment. One by one, witnesses took the stand. County officials, former HOA board members, real estate experts, all confirming the legitimacy of my family's ownership and the HOA's illegal encroachments. Then came the most damning testimony of all. The county surveyor, Mr. Whitaker. "In my 40 years of service, I have never seen such blatant forgery," he testified. "The original property lines have remained consistent since 1957. The HOA's revised maps were manipulated to seize additional shoreline without legal authority." Margaret's attorney tried to object, but the judge overruled. The courtroom was silent except for the quiet scratching of pens on notepads as journalists chronicled every word. Finally, the judge addressed Margaret directly. "Miss Simmons, do you have anything to say before I render my decision?" Margaret stood, her voice shaking for the first time. "Your Honor, all I wanted was to improve our community. I didn't intend for things to get out of hand. The judge raised a skeptical eyebrow. Ms. Simmons, improving the community does not grant you the right to falsify documents, intimidate residents, and illegally seize private property. Your actions have not only violated the law, but have deeply damaged the trust within this community. After a long pause, the judge delivered his final verdict. This court finds in favor of Mr. Collins. All claims filed by the HOA are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, an independent investigation into the HOA's conduct will commence immediately. Any assets unlawfully seized or funds misappropriated will be returned or accounted for. Ms. Simmons, you are hereby removed from your position as HOA president, effective immediately. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Margaret's face went pale as the weight of her downfall settled on her shoulders. Reporters rushed to the hallway as news outlets began broadcasting the breaking verdict. Margaret was led out of the courtroom by officers for questioning on charges of fraud, forgery, and abuse of authority. The months that followed saw an unprecedented cleanup of the Lakeside HOA. The state attorney general launched a formal investigation that uncovered years of financial mismanagement under Margaret's leadership. HOA dues had been embezzled, legal fees had been funneled into personal accounts, and backroom deals had been made to enrich a select few. The financial audit revealed a staggering misuse of HOA funds. Lavish vacations, personal renovations, and unauthorized bonuses had drained the HOA's reserves. The remaining HOA board members held an emergency election, and for the first time in years, fair and honest leadership emerged. New board president Ellen Monroe reached out to me personally within days of her election. Mr. Collins, on behalf of the new HOA board and our entire community, I want to apologize for everything you've endured, Ellen said during our meeting at the community hall. This HOA was never meant to become a dictatorship. We hope you'll consider remaining an active voice in our community as we rebuild trust. I nodded thoughtfully. I'll always be willing to lend a hand, but only if we remember that these lands belong to the people who live here, not those who seek power over them. In the weeks that followed, the new HOA leadership enacted sweeping reforms. Transparency measures were put in place, financial audits were made public, and all major decisions required homeowner votes. HOA dues were lowered, and funds were redirected to legitimate community improvements rather than personal luxuries. The illegal pathway project was officially canceled, and crews arrived to repair and restore the shoreline that had been damaged during the demolition attempt. Meanwhile, Margaret's legal troubles deepened. Investigators uncovered additional evidence of witness intimidation, bribery attempts, and collusion with unscrupulous developers who sought to profit from the shoreline expansion. Federal charges were brought against her, and the prospect of significant prison time loomed. The scandal drew national attention. News outlets ran exposés on HOA abuses across the country, and lawmakers at both the state and federal levels introduced new legislation to curb HOA authority and protect homeowners' rights. The HOA Reform Act passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, mandating strict oversight, financial transparency, and stronger homeowner protections nationwide. As the seasons changed, so did the atmosphere in Willow Lake. The community grew, closer, united by the hard lessons of the past. Block parties, volunteer days, and community events replaced tense board meetings and hostile confrontations. The once fractured neighborhood blossomed into a vibrant, supportive community, where residents finally felt heard and respected. On the one-year anniversary of the final verdict, a special celebration was held at the community center. I was invited. As the guest of honor and as I stood at the podium, I looked out at the smiling faces of my neighbors, grateful for the journey that had brought us here. This land has always been more than just property lines and legal documents, I said. It's about the people who live here, who care for it, and who refuse to let greed and power tear it apart. We've proven that when we stand together, even the strongest forces of corruption can be defeated. The crowd erupted in applause. and for the first time in a long time, I felt a true sense of peace. The cabin my grandfather had built stood, tall behind me, a symbol of resilience and justice. The fight had been long, but it was worth every battle, every sleepless night, and every moment of doubt. As I walked back to my cabin that evening, the sunset painted the lake in hues of gold and crimson. The calm waters reflected not just the sky, but the strength of a community that had reclaimed its soul. Margaret Simmons was no longer a looming shadow, but a distant memory, her downfall serving as a lasting reminder of what happens when power is abused. In the end, Willow Lake didn't just survive. It thrived. And as I sipped my coffee on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one, I knew that my grandfather would be proud. His legacy lived on, not just in the land he loved, but in the people who had fought to protect it.